You are listening to the Small Town Big Arts podcast. I'm your host, Jeffrey Kirshner, the CEO of the Academy Center of the Arts in Lynchburg, Virginia. In my own work as an arts leader, I have found it difficult to access resources for arts organizations and artists serving smaller communities. On each episode, Small Town Big Arts sets out to drive conversations and provide inspiration for those serving smaller communities through the arts. If you like what you hear, please rate and review us and share with your friends and colleagues who are working to promote the arts in smaller communities across America. You can also learn more by visiting us at smalltownbigarts.com. Today's guest is Heather Pontonio, the Senior Program Director at the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation, where she is responsible for national strategy and administration of the art program portfolio focused on professional practices for both artists and curators. Heather has been instrumental in the launch of Artists Thrive, a national tool to assess and improve conditions for artists. She serves on the Appalachia Funders Network Steering Committee and CAA's Services to Artists Committee. Heather has a master's degree in public administration from New York University and a bachelor's degree in arts administration from the State University of New York at Fredonia. Artists Thrive aims to identify the things that help artists pursue their vision and enable communities to benefit from the arts in all aspects of life. Resources and tools within Artists Thrive help artists, arts organizations, and other groups that work with artists collaborate and craft meaningful stories about why art making matters. The initiative began in 2016 when a group of arts professionals and artists produced the first draft of this field-wide assessment rubric. Through multiple rounds of feedback, Artists Thrive was publicly launched in 2017. Artists Thrive is driven by a leadership team of artists and diverse collaborators from different sectors and communities across the country and is supported by the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation. So Heather, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me today for Small Town Big Arts. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thanks for inviting me to join you.
Well, this is new for us, and I'm excited to share your work with the audience and to add this to the portfolio that we have at Small Town Big Arts, because you are exactly who many artists and arts organizations in small communities should be connecting with and visiting the Arts Thrive site and hopefully engaging in a summit, which we'll talk a little bit as we move through. I note that your foundation, the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation, has a focus on supporting art careers. And in the website, it says, since 2002, EHTF directly expanded career opportunities for visual artists by increasing access to business development expertise, entrepreneurial skills, and related professional practice and career supports. So I'm imagining that is the inspiration, right, for Artists Thrive. So share a little bit about how you all came to founding Artists Thrive and what the why of Artists Thrive is.
Yes. So the Tremaine Foundation, from its start in the art program portfolio, was very focused on artist careers and the need for artists to have the business skills and ability to run their art business as a sole entrepreneur. And back, 20 years ago, that was really hard to, for artists to navigate or get the support they needed. And so, we started kind of developing this field of professional development. It wasn't, I think there was 5 organizations in the entire country that did any professional development for artists before we started funding in that way. And so shortly after our when we started funding organizations to do this work, we started convening them together each year so they could learn from each other. And it was, over the course of that time, we started to see the seeds of Artists Thrive come to be. So it was, all these organizations across the country asking, yeah, the professional development's nice and really important, but what's the holistic look? What else can we do? How are we getting our organizations to think beyond just the business class? And how are we getting artists to see the holistic look of their lives, not just, again, it's tax season, I must have a workshop on doing my taxes better.
Right.
So it was that convening of the organizations together in a room that said, we need to do this. We need to create this, assessment tool. They named it Artists Thrive, and it was really their work that drove the all of this work up to today, from the start of the rubrics, the start of the work, up to what we have now. So the Tremaine Foundation is the backbone support for it and the minister of it, but the content, the look on it, the determination of the categories and the measures that we need to be looking at are by those working directly with artists and artists themselves all across the country.
Yeah, I think this is a really important addition to the conversations we've been having. So much of the focus, and I think a lot of it comes from my own background that I'm coming at this as an arts administrator, but had a previous life as an artist, and I think we've so much been focused on sort of the sustainability, long term, the long term sustainability. I hate that word sustainability though. We've been having lots of conversations about sustainability too, what exactly that means, but regardless, that's often how we talk about the health of an organization.
Mhm.
So we've been spending a lot of time focused on the organizations, but obviously at the end of the day, the workforce, the artists, the deliverers of the impact, are a critical component of this and can be lost. I think we're at the end of the year with our organization. We're thinking a lot about next year's budget and how we're going to sort of navigate this new environment that we're in. One of the things that I really loved, and we can maybe talk a little bit about this. I know you all are inspired quite a bit from looking at the material on the social profit handbook.
Yeah.
And there's a quote that you all have on the website that is, if you measure what you value, people will value what you measure.
Yep.
And I really love this, because one of the common themes that we keep coming back to and over again in all the organizations that we've spoken to so far, is very clear that the secret sauce, right? That one of the main ingredients to their success is they have clearly identified something that has legitimate value to the community. And in turn, the community feels that and then supports them, and that helps them create a sustainable path as they move forward. So I think if you could share a little bit about the social profit handbook and how that kind of ties into the larger work that you all are doing, and how that inspires how you move forward.
Yeah. So David Grant, the author of the Social Puppet Handbook, has been part of Artist Thrive from the start. He met with all of our grantees and everyone and helped them kind of develop this understanding. He has a background in education as well, and this idea of formative assessment rubrics is completely foreign to the arts world unless you happen to be in arts education somehow. So it's been wonderful to kind of work with David and then reshape and rethink about how we measure what we do in the arts. And from the administration side, we've always been so concerned about, how many butts are in the seats, how many tickets are purchased, how many people did you reach in whichever way. We've never really been able to figure out how do we translate that into the less tangible and more the heart part of it all, right? So, the phrase of, art is at the heart of everything we do, but we don't use those measurements and things as well, in that. And it's partly because we don't bring that formative assessment framework into our work, that we can't use descriptors. We can't use the stories in the same way that now with the Artist Thrive rubric, we have the ability to drop and hang the stories throughout the tool to say, hey, this is what a descriptor is. And here's what it looks like in the world. And so we can start to say, well, if we're looking for this, how do we talk about it? How do we measure it differently? Because if that's what we want to see, if that's the story we want to be able to share, we need to be working towards that point. And so it shifts us to say, okay, maybe having a 70% sold out house is more important if those 70% are deeply engaged and walk away changed in some way, more than 100% at capacity that we're just spending their evening there because it was a free ticket. Something very easy to make a shift, but it really shifts how we think about the value in the arts world. And so David, has worked with us from the start, up until recently, still does, to help us kind of shape all of that work from all of his experience through the formative assessment universe. So again, it's the Social Profit Handbook is a wonderful book. If you don't own it, you should. The biggest challenge I had reading the book is I instantly wanted to go and start doing things in the handbook, and it's like, no, you got to read the whole thing before you get started and jump in. But it's a great, I mean, it truly is a handbook. It's not just a typical story chapters, read on. It's a lot of ways to approach it and do it from a lot of different sectors, not just the one original kind of education sector, but also all across.
Well, and with that, I noted, some of the examples on the site that artists thrive on the site. A lot of the examples are oriented around food and nutrition. I noticed that. Share a little bit about how obviously each organization is going to be different. Each artist is going to be a little bit different, but how that, some examples of how that might show up, right? Because I think about immediately we talk about, the arts are sometimes it's seemingly hard to measure in kind of traditional ways. I even remember at one point, when I was involved with national art strategies, there was a group from England that had been working on a way of measuring happiness in a community because they were trying to tie that back to arts activity and arts engagement. But share a little bit about how we can kind of think about maybe measurables or goals or the values that exist with something like food or social service sector, but
Mhm.
how that translates to the arts and how an arts organization artists might begin to think about this.
Yeah, so this concept of formative assessment is brand new in the arts world, but has existed for many, many years. And the ones that are national, field-wide used rubrics come from the food and urban conservation, as well as the initial one that was done with the Center of Whole Communities called Whole Measures: Transforming Our Vision and Measures of Success. And that one really looked at land conservation. And before they wrote this rubric, they really measured how many dollars did we spend to buy the land and how many acres have we preserved. Total numbers, we can measure that. Okay, we did it. What they started to find out was by those being the only measures they looked at, the land wasn't cared for by the community. No one was using it in ways that actually promoted the growth and nature that you wanted to see in these conserved lands. So
Yeah.
when they shifted to this formative assessment lens, and the beauty of formative assessment is you have this rubric grid and you see what bad performance looks like and you see what thriving looks like. And so when you lay out something like that, their grid went from just how many acres do we preserve to how are we preserving those acres? How is the community using it? And so the bottom end was sure we preserved it, but no one comes into the land. And to the top end, it's thriving. There's volunteer groups, the Boy Scouts are involved, all these things are happening. And so, this is the first one in the arts world. And all these other ones, we've seen federal agencies take them on to determine funding and focus areas to say, hey, land yourself on this tool, then we'll provide funding that helps you move up to a higher level towards the thriving lens. So we kind of hope within the art world that we start to see that coming as this takes hold across the country, that funders start stepping in to say, hey, fill this out. Tell me where you're not doing as well as you want to be doing. Again, in a formative assessment lens, you put yourself where you are today and just visually reading the higher levels, you see a path forward. You start to come up with a plan. You start to think about what change could look like. And so, it's not prescriptive by any means, but we've seen a lot of steps forward come out of simply the realization of reading what a path to thriving would look like.
So tell me a little bit about the process. So if somebody goes to the website, there's a path to take a survey, move through that, and then there's building rubrics. Share a little bit about if I'm an arts organization or I'm an artist, I'm coming to your website, what that process looks like, what I'm doing.
Yep. So the brand new website we just launched last month is obviously artistthrive.org. And when you land on the site, it gives you a lot of grounding within it. So you can wander the site for a while just reading a lot of tools and ideas. But within the assess area of the site, lives both tools. One tool is I am an artist for artists themselves, and I work with artists. And then from the site, you can jump into a true survey site, kind of like a Survey Monkey look, where you can check the box that's appropriate, or you can download it as a PDF. So if you want to see it in that grid format as a rubric, you can do that. We've also now added to the site a Word version of it. So you can download it and redefine those descriptors that make it really relevant to you locally. Because no tool in this country is going to address everything from really rural arts to really urban arts and all those needs in between. That Word version also includes a blank area on it so you can add your specific measures or metrics or things you're looking to focus on.
Nice.
So it allows you to kind of go through the survey. You don't have to do the entire thing. You can pick a single category or a single question to be the focus area of it. And one really important thing to note of it, there is no login required to get to it, and there is no charge attached to it. Everything on the site is
That's
completely free
wonderful.
and will remain that way.
That's wonderful. I noticed too. I was going through, and you can also start it. You can return to it, right? It's, particularly if trouble finding time of the day to get it done. It's very easy to navigate and really accessible.
Right. And so on the website, we've got a new area under the improve header that gives you ideas of how you can use the tool. So yes, it is a self-assessment tool, but now what do I do once I've completed that?
Yeah.
So it gives some ideas for how you can use it for self-reflection, how you can, as an organization, use it for your advocacy or your strategic planning process, things like that. Because really the whole idea to jump into this is to start the conversation, to start the work and start the planning. You don't finish it by completing the survey. You've finished step one,
Right.
that leads you into what your path is.
Yeah. Well, this is great. I'm curious. You have a really, by doing this work right now, you probably have a really fantastic window into the field right now and organizations in the field. And the focus of this is, organizations and communities smaller than 100,000. And so it tends to be some obstacles or issues that organizations have for capacity building or mission delivery, or artists having an environment in which they're being supported as fully as possible. Some things have crossover across bigger communities and smaller communities, but obviously smaller communities have some specific barriers that exist in regards to just the size of the population. Very often, too, funding sources are limited and can be difficult to navigate. Um, what are you seeing in the field in regards to success stories? Um, or actually, let me start here before we go to the success stories. What are you seeing as barriers for in smaller communities for arts organizations in regards to mission delivery and organizational capacity? What are you seeing that's common?
So the most common of no matter honestly, no matter where you are, it definitely resonates the most in rural areas is that network, that local, the go-to network of folks that are potentially outside of your discipline itself, but provide you that support in the insight and mentorship and guidance. It's a lot harder in small communities to find that network than it is in, a city where you have thousands of artists and other folks. But we're definitely
That's
seeing that now.
specifically the artists, right? If you're talking about the
Mhm.
artists, their network is limited.
I mean, it's really both. I mean, if you
Yeah.
live in a small community, how many arts organizations are there? And that kind of support. In some cases, there's very few nonprofits, not just arts nonprofits, nonprofits at
No
all.
idea.
So again, from the Artist Thrive side, having the social media sites in groups, having these various ways that we can network online and things, it's kind of helping bridge some of those divides of folks to know that you're not alone. You're not the only one going through these things. And that's one of the big things about the site that we'll continue to build is video stories from artists and arts administrators that talk about where they are and what they're doing. The actually the top of the assess page on the site has a great video from artist Mitzi Sinnott, and she's in rural Kentucky, and reading the site, she realized that she wasn't the only one feeling these ways, and that simply knowing that you're unique, but you weren't unique in this issue, allowed for that idea of, hey, how can I put the question out there? How can I seek support? How can I find those resources and tools to help me improve and not just feel isolated and alone in my community?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We find too, uh, that network building is critical. It can be critical in regards to board governance, funders, donors, etc. It also, I've noticed this. The inspiration for the start of this was I had been working on a strategic plan for an organization in my hometown, which is a very very small town. They have a community arts center that is has really struggled, and very often they find themselves sort of spinning their wheels. And they have connectivity to the community because it's a small community, but the resources do feel limited, and their ability to generate ideas, and even sometimes I think the psychological and emotional component of feeling like you're failing or you're alone, right? To have people, to have peers that you can turn to support you and help you, obviously with strategy, but also just in sort of the emotional toll that it can take.
Right.
Do you all find that we kind of think about this is right in an era where we're talking a lot about burnout and people, really struggling to stay in the work? Are you seeing and hearing that too in conversations that you all are having?
Yeah, so a huge conversation we've been having kind of internally within the Artist Five Circle is the difference between exhaustion and burnout. And, I think, in many ways, a lot of folks aren't at burnout yet, but they're exhausted.
Yeah,
And the feeling is, once you get to that burnout stage, you're done, and most likely you're out of the arts, and you've found, financial path somewhere else. But there's only so far we can take our levels of exhaustion to burnout, which was part of the reason that the revised tools that just came out last month include a whole self-care section that wasn't in the tools up until last month. And it was that need that we're really good in the arts about caring about others, not so good about taking care of ourselves.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that's an issue across the entire nonprofit sector, right? There's this sort of we're here for everybody else
Yeah.
and to our own detriment, right? And
'Cause there'll always be a quiet time tomorrow, right? It's like you have to keep pushing through today thinking that tomorrow it'll calm down, but it never does.
yeah, yeah.
Yep.
Um, I'm kind of curious too. We're obviously it's going to be particular to particular organizations. I'm going to use my own organization because I'm thinking about this right now, right? Like we have multiple means of delivery of mission. Some of it is completely subsidized and supported through charitable means, and so there is work that goes into making sure that that funding is there and happens. But then there's another side of the organization that delivers ticketed programming, and so there's lots of conversations that go on behind the scenes in regards to those selections, those choices that we're making in regards to the shows that we're producing and sharing. And very often we are making decisions based on what we think is going to be good for the community to see, um, and and uh, and and also have what we right subjectively feel is art, has artistic worth. At the same time, right, we are very aware that our value, right, in the community is being responsive to what they desire to see and connect to, right? And sometimes, right, we will find that the most profitable and engaged things that we do may not fall into the first category I described, that we felt, oh, this is really something right now that the community really needs. And we feel this is going to be something that's going to be about community health. Now I could spin it, right? So I'll use a real specific example. So within the same 2 weeks, we had The Price is Right live, right? Which just sold tickets, tons of people come out. Certain board members love that, what the profit looks like on that show, right? People had a fantastic time, right? I don't know if that's valid for our artistic mission. On the flip side, we brought Alvin Ailey's second company that within that same 2 week period had a very good audience, like a full audience. It was for those in the audience. It was a transformative experience. It was absolutely incredible. We brought students in that got to engage with the work, meet the artist firsthand, and we were like, this is the space, right, we want to be in. And it made like $800, I think, at the end, right? And that was with underwriting and a bunch of bunch
Mhm.
of support on it. So this can, right, when we talk about value, right, if I'm just on a surface level going to be like, oh, what's the value here, I can describe to you, right, what the students felt and how great this was. But if I board member, I'll just use a random board member because they're not all going to be the same. But if I have a board member who's like, yeah, but look at Price is Right live made you $12,000 keeping the lights on, and Ailey was almost at a loss. What So I think I kind of know the answer to this, but tell me a bit about how the survey and the rubrics, right, which are navigating, going back to that social profit handbook
Yep.
um, quote about if you measure what you value, people if you measure what you value, people will value what you measure. Help me in this moment, right? If I'm in front of the board, right, and we're trying to navigate that that duality of those two events.
Right. Well, I mean, and that's the beauty of rubrics, right? So if you lay it out and you say, here's what we're valuing, then you can lay out and say, is the high value the dollars you make, or is it the impact you have? Is it educational or is it entertainment? And so it really comes down to shaping out for yourselves, what does success look like in that, for your programming, right? So you're not just talking about the single one show, you're the whole season. What does the programming look like?
Sure.
Are you looking to have a mix? Are you looking to engage an audience in a way that is that speaks to your entire community, not just to one set of community? So I think it's about you figuring out what you're trying to measure and what you value. And it sounds a bit from your board, total typical board. The question is, where's the money, right? So it's, how do you lay it out so that you have a mix of income
Yeah.
that aligns with, the entertainment that brings in the high dollars and the educational or impactful ones that maybe don't turn around a profit, but collectively you can look back and say, our entire season spoke to the community on a variety of different levels. So I think when we look at it as a sole dollar question, well, are you valuing dollar or are you valuing community engagement? So,
Yeah. Well, it's great. That's a great way of framing it too, because I do think that internally, right, we very often what the staff conversation is about that is we just saw a whole bunch of new people come into our venue that have never been here before. They got, we have this beautiful historic theater. They got to experience the space. They got to, share. I mean, it is I will actually say Price is Right live. I can't believe that this is coming up in this podcast, but it is actually a fascinating cultural sort of experience. It's interactive. The audience is engaged. They're standing up. People are shouting out numbers. I mean, it is actually, I think on just sort of if we're going to look at the idea of people engaging with our facility and coming together, we certainly talk about it in those terms. We're not necessarily speaking to it in regards to the ticket dollars, except for on the budgeting side when we have to report that back out to the board. That's actually when it comes up, right? Internally, we're like, oh, we see the value in this for us as a staff,
yeah.
right? But then when it gets to the board, it's all of a sudden framed somewhat, or we're looking at it suddenly in the financial terms.
Right.
Uh,
And so this is something that we deal with all the time in the Artist Thrive rubrics as they are, is even if you look at just one of the categories, you can't be, well, you can be, but you generally aren't going to be thriving at the highest level in everything. The thriving is an aspirational level. Okay. And we believe if we all get to thriving, then we're going to redo the rubrics and make the thriving just surviving and write a new thriving level and keep pushing us all forward. And in that process, we hope that the very bottom of the rubric, the silence part, is just unthinkable. It's gone. It's not even on the document anymore because we've moved forward in a way. So the entire spectrum is artists give up, or sorry, artists are silenced, artists struggle, artists survive, and artists thrive. So
yeah.
that the silenced is in a future iteration is actually what we currently have as struggle. So the struggle is silenced. And so we see growth. But in that frame, unless you are an incredible organization or a well experienced established artist, you're not going to be thriving across the board. And so, as you look at those answers, if you see an area you want to improve, it may cause you to have to sit back and say, well, improvement here could require me to step down there. And is it okay as I look at this to kind of get some of them more in the middle, more at the survive level, and not necessarily have the silenced and thriving spectrum across. But there is a trade-off in the work and the focus you do. So, kind of in your example of your organization, if you say, okay, we're going to do everything that relates to positive income, what's the trade-off?
Yeah.
And so how do you decide? And so, if you look at it and you say, well, that the Ailey audience was a brand new audience that brought it in, sure, it wasn't a huge dollar earner, but was it actually marketing and audience engagement and outreach that you would have spent a heck of a lot more through social media, other sites in order to bring them in that way? So I think there's a way that to just in the framing of the spectrum across the rubric, you can make decisions of, yeah, we're low here and we acknowledge we're low in this, but we're low here so we can be high here in the focus of what we do.
Well, and I love being able to have something, a system to talk to the board about, right, that shows them clearly, where the successes and failures lie, right, within, because we are a nonprofit organization, it's mission based. And interestingly enough, in our last board meeting when we presented the budget, there was a question about our from a board member about the percentage of charitable giving to earned giving within the organization. And uh, and and that question was raised because of the amount of donated dollars that we currently have to pull into the organization each year. And my response at the time, which was, the question was whether we could raise that earned dollar amount. Is that feasible or possible? And my answer was we could, right, but that might be at the cost of what we want the institution to be.
Who are you
And
valuing? Yep.
so I think I was able to say that on the fly, right, in this Q&A at the end of the board presentation. But I do think having all of the board on the same page and understanding these are, this is our rubrics, this is what we value. This falls into this category, this falls into that category. We're prioritizing this over that. And everybody understands that, right? Everybody in the room is on the team. They get what that is. Because when I answered the question, it did stop the questioning, right? It was like, yes, we do want a community-centered arts organization that values ALE and the student engagement and all the things, right, that come with that. That is the institution we want. We don't want the Price is Right live every Saturday night at the organization. So occasionally fine, but not all the time. And so I do think though, right, and I think particularly I'm lucky in that I've been with my institution for almost 8 years. The board knows me, and maybe even to some degree I think even trust me too much now, right, that there is right there. So like, oh yeah, they've got it, it's fine, right? So they push back a little bit, we provide the answer, and they move on. I know a lot of organizations and leaders are not in that circumstance, right, where they're somewhat embattled and they're trying to change the culture within the institution. So tools like this are really helpful, where it is, and it comes from thought leaders, right? And you can say, look, this is tested, this is true, this is really valuable. We can all get on the same page with what we're doing and why we're doing it. um, and that drive towards, particularly in ticketed, I mean, there's lots of ways, right, arts organizations deliver mission, but the ticketing program often pushes, right, the commercial aspects of entertainment. And so I think that this is really helpful to push back
Yeah,
on
so
that.
there's a few pieces here that are, kind of tidbits woven within what you've said. Is it's a national tool. So it's not written by you. It's not your sole advocate voice for the artist. It's a national tool that has been vetted by 80 plus organizations all across the country that say, yeah, we kind of agree with this. We like the language. This is what's live on the site now is actually the fourth iteration of it. Listening to feedback, figuring out where the nuances weren't quite right in the text or descriptors, because it's not designed to be judgmental. It's designed to ask you where you are in that moment. And so we've seen a lot of groups be able to say, this particular row or something is really relevant to our conversation. We're going to take this single row as a survey to our board and see where they land on it. And they can't look at me and say, hey, staff member who's always advocated that the arts don't get enough or the artists don't get enough funding from our budget. We can say, this isn't me. This is a national tool that says we need to look at this. And are we okay if we don't thrive at a national standard? And so it opens up that door for conversation to look at things in different ways and remove any sort of emotional judgment kind of connection from you and the board or other staff. And then what we're also seeing is a lot of groups starting to use this at the organization wise of, again, pick a few questions, pick a few rows, pick a category or so of asking the staff to do it and then the board to do it and compare where there's alignment and misalignment.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of time the board thinks everything is wonderful and things are great, and the staff are really struggling to make it work. And so looking at it, you can say, board, you think we're here and thriving, but staff really says we're struggling around this. How do we even have that conversation to get on the same page? And maybe it does require a strategic realignment or something else to happen in order to move forward, but it just completely changes that ability to have a conversation about the important things. And what we've often find is that the board had no clue because there wasn't a structure to have that conversation
Right.
happen.
Yeah, they didn't have a way of looking at it and
Right.
measure.
So they knew what they knew often as community members or things like that, and not realizing that there was even more that they could do, or more that could be done. And especially in that lens again through this of the support for artists in that work.
Well, and so often what the board is presented, right, is through the lens of the budget,
Yeah.
and because they're financially responsible for the organization, so that's very often, and it's the easiest way for them to get their head around if they're not in the sector, sort of the health of the organization. That's the easiest way to do it, and it makes sense. Like that's the, I mean, it's what we've created. That's what we've done. We've set it up
Yeah.
that way. So it is really helpful if there's something besides the budget, right, or the balance sheet.
Well, and even in that lens, right? So if you're kind of thinking about how you're measuring what you value, and framing that out, what is being done that has a cost to it, but it's done as in kind or extra hours you're working that you aren't paid for. So one of the things we often advocate for is organizations to start to add an additional column in their board spreadsheets that is just an in kind dollar amount.
Oh, that's
So
great.
if you're paid for 40 hours, but you're working 60 hours a week, that additional salary should be in that column for them to understand beyond our actual cash budget. Here's everything else that's going into it. And through that, we've seen some groups be able to make goals to say, okay, if we're not paying artists what they should be paying, we're giving them a $200 honorarium rather than living wage. Then, if we make the in kind what that equation is to get it up there, now we have board goals for fundraising and things to actually be able to have a solid number and not just say, hey, let's fundraise $20,000 more this year for artists. We can actually show this that's already happening and we're not paying for it, right?
Yeah, yeah, I think that that's, and I find with my conversations with, it doesn't matter whether it's in the arts sector or even outside the arts sector, um, our community here, we're pretty interconnected with all the nonprofit organizations. The small ones, this is always the case, right? They're working far more hours than what they're getting paid for, and that's not getting measured, and it's not really understood clearly, and that's a really important bridge for the board and for donors to understand. I'm curious, a lot of this is geared towards a smaller community and very often rural community organizations. One of the things that has come up quite a bit in conversations with a couple of the organizations, not all, but a couple, is that very often the artists are, a large portion of the artists might be outsourced. So they're coming into the community, infusing their work within the community, and then departing that community. And there's a combo that happens, but I'm curious because Artists Thrive is so oriented around the artist, right? And the organizations are part of that larger ecosystem that supports the artists. Share a little bit about why it is, or maybe it isn't. If you think it is, if the rural, if the rural ecosystem, right, being a part of this national picture, why that engagement, why having the ability to bring artists to a community is important in terms of artists thriving and being supported here in the country.
Yeah, so I think there's maybe there are opposing views on that altogether. One
Yeah, it's a
is
complex. I would say it's a complex for the organizations when I talk to them about it too.
right. I mean, it's the nature of who we are as humans. If you bring in someone that's not local, you somehow respect or elevate their work higher than
Mm,
those who maybe locally could do the exact same work.
yeah.
So that's an interesting piece in itself. But the what we're finding in a lot of places where there are local artists who aren't valued locally, they're either fully online, not contributing in any way to their community, or they're leaving those communities.
Yeah.
So if a rural community wants artists and art to be core, it has to be supporting the local ecosystem. And that might be something as simple as every time an external artist comes in from somewhere else, there is an engagement time for the local artist. There's a chance for them to hear from a different perspective or others, or that artist does studio visits and things that provides an opportunity that otherwise would be really challenging for that rural artist to get on their own. And in many ways, what we've seen in the COVID dynamic of the shift is having the ability to do Zoom studio tours and be connected with folks that in some ways those barriers of how challenging it could be to get to a rural place are kind of gone because
Yeah.
artists are now understanding how you can take your phone and walk around your studio and there's absolutely nothing that replaces the in-person experience, but I think there's a lot more opportunity now to think about how you capitalize on any sort of connection wherever they are. And if those local artists aren't feeling supported, they'll move on. They'll find another community at some point. I mean, in many cases, they're connected to that place because of family, because of something else. But often those really successful rural artists are totally eBay, Etsy, online sourced
Yeah.
artists but they don't really have a local grounding in that. There's a few groups through my career that we've seen that were so like residency focused that brought in all these artists but had no local connection, that have really changed it to say everyone they brought in had to go visit the community. They had to go around and see what this place was, because if they were just coming from an external place, coming into that one venue, doing that one thing and leaving, they weren't grasping anything about that community and that concept. And if if that community wants national ambassadors to come and visit or to know or be part, you have to allow those artists, whether they're local or from somewhere else, to really experience the community and be part of it.
Yeah, I will say that the success stories have been when the artists from the outside are coming in, it is happening in a way that's being fully integrated into the culture and ecosystem of the organizations. I'm wondering, if sometimes too, because the arts are so subjective, what we value or what we're drawn to, what we're interested in, if organizations can also get stuck in their perception of what arts and culture is,
Yeah.
right, and not seeing that in their own community there is actually quite a bit of arts and culture. They're just not identifying it maybe as arts and culture. Are you finding that at points?
Definitely, especially in Appalachia and a lot of areas where craft is just a way of life. They
Yeah.
don't necessarily step back and say, "Hey, this, woven blanket, this, piece of pottery, this, dynamic that anyone else around the country would look at and say, this is incredible art." They're surprised that this is, seen as art that way. And we see it very much in the country in the native, frame. Native Americans are naturally, creative and culture bearers and storytellers that we look at it and say, don't you realize that you could check that box on the grant form and apply for a grant for what you do? You're like, but I'm not an artist. I'm just bearing my history and sharing that with others. So I think there's dynamics around what we have labeled in the country as art and artists and folks that it's been a pull to say, how do we include even more who are that deserve to be honored and included in those?
Well, it's interesting, too, that it's also running both directions, that the artists themselves are also like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
I don't fit in with you, organization, because I'm not viewing myself through the same lens.
It
Right.
was
This is just what
actually
we do. This is a part of our culture. This is what, and that it's running maybe in both ways.
Well, and it was an interesting finding that we had with COVID, is Americans for the Arts did a national survey of artists to ask, were you applying for the unemployment since gig workers were included? And the volume of artists who said, no, I'm doing okay. I don't, and I need that, but I won't go ask for that. And it was often because they didn't see themselves as business people, as entrepreneurs, that their craft, their art was now not raising any income, but they didn't see it as business unemployment as they should. So I think it's across the board we're seeing those dynamics of when an artist sees it as their business and when they see it as just part of who they are.
Yeah. What are some small town orgs that you're seeing that are doing a really great job right now?
Oh, you're gonna ask me to call out a particular place in the country on the spot. Ouch. Um, I mean, there's so many interesting little projects that are going on, I mean, honestly, all over, whether it be larger or smaller cities. I think, Austin, Texas has some great pop-up galleries and things. There's an organization called Dorf that started in their garage, and said, we need more exhibition space. So instead of parking our cars here, we're going to convert it into a gallery, and they're becoming incredibly successful.
Mhm.
And Austin's not a tiny town, but it has a tiny town mentality when it comes to, that's not Austin city limits, or, the large, South by Southwest or things like that.
Yeah.
So, interesting things from there. We're seeing, because of the response of COVID, a lot more organizations figure out how to support artists in different ways, which is huge. Historically in this country, maybe one grant a year, one program a year was available to you, and now we're seeing a lot more, maybe smaller opportunities or concerns for replacement on, certain equipment or things like that over time. So that's been a great step forward to see the country more concerned around that. um, Omaha, Nebraska has the Bemis Center, and they're doing a lot of outreach and programs for artists, which has been wonderful, as well as a curator in residence, I guess is the frame, that has been brought in from an outside area that then works with the local artists, and it does an exhibition of local artists, bringing an external lens into that community. So, very unique way to approach it from there, and not just say, okay, we bring in a curator in residence and they also get to bring in artists from all over the country. It's, let's really focus on, the talent and the skills we have here.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
and the
yeah, and
locale.
lift them up. So yeah, there's a lot of little projects that are happening that are great.
Yeah, one of the things, just thinking about the value of bringing artists onto the team, because I noticed, in some of the questions, right? There are questions too about how many artists are on your staff. How many, what does that look like? And one of the things uh, we started last year, we're in our second year of it. We hadn't done this previously, but we have an artist in residency program now, and we have found that it is really helpful. The artists are based here, they're based locally, but we've found that it's really helpful when we have a particular set of programs that are going to be a focus for us, or we want to engage something going on in the campus on a deeper level. The artists are a fantastic addition to the team, right? Just the voice that they can give. They turn the volume up on everything would be the best way I could kind of explain it, because they personify something in a way that allows us to tell a story a lot more effectively. Last year we had a spoken word artist who was a poet, and we were able to, as we were coming back to live performances, he was really, really helpful in creating a much higher level of a voice for how important this was, right? To
Yeah.
be together again and articulate in a way better than any of the rest of us could have. His poems were put on donor thank you cards and on materials and all kinds of things. This year our pottery studio is a big focus, and so this year's artist in residence is a ceramic artist. And again, too, we were able to showcase his work. He is able to find ways to expand the education programs right now through collaborations and connectivity that he has. So we're finding that sometimes the go-to can be on the organization side. Oh, this is like, how are we going to fund this, right? How are we going to pay for this artist that doesn't have a ticket, or necessarily could, but or it does, it's not as, it's not The Price is Right live. It's horrible that keeps coming out. But um, but I think it's really important. Remember, I think, going back to this, that the value can really extend way beyond um, just their function for themselves, right? This can actually aid the institution in a really dramatic way that you couldn't have done otherwise.
Yeah, we've seen in a few places, in Winston-Salem, there's an incredible summer program called Lyrics by the Lake, and it's a combination of spoken word poetry and music performance and such. And they went into an agreement and partnership with one of the local art museums. And so the art museum has plenty of parking. They're on a lake, which is why it's called Lyrics by the Lake. But it was, one of those that the museum had never rented out. to they weren't a nonprofit. They're a group of artists that have put this thing together.
Yeah.
And it's shifting how the museum thinks about their audience and how they engage with folks. And so, how do you do your rentals if they're only for large corporate events or for weddings or things? And who are you excluding from that because you aren't considering all those who could possibly utilize in your space in different ways? And just by the nature of it, the majority of people who attend that, Lyrics by the Lake are people who would never go to that museum.
Yeah, that's great.
And and so it's like but it takes that step back to say, how can artists and this kind of collaborative, collective idea shift who we are as an institution and open it up to more, but also support artists in ways that, they never could have afforded the venue or that kind of thing at the corporate rate. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really, and we find too, right, as an organization that rents space, the highest value to us that we've internally and externally communicated is it's for us, for our mission, it should be arts organizations, our artists first and foremost, not the wedding, um or Price is Right live.
But and,
um
and in that vein, like what we're seeing again is that if you think through it, is it publicly on your site? That is it a discount grader if you're an arts organization or an artist looking to use it? Is it some way shared that your value of the arts is framed out in your rental page? And
well,
often they're not. Yeah.
yeah, that's a great point. I need to check ours actually, make sure that that is the case. I'm pretty sure it is, but
Giving you work.
now I'm
Sorry.
thinking like, are we doing that? We got to make sure we are. So let's talk a little bit about the summit. You all have a summit coming up this summer, and I think it would be great to share with folks, a bit about the summit. I know registration starts in the spring. Share a little bit about who the summit could benefit and who you're looking to attend the summit.
Yeah, so let me back up a little bit to our first summit in 2017. And based upon relationships we had as the Tremaine Foundation and one of the original folks in the core development team of Artist Thrive, we chose to have the summit in Berea, Kentucky. Very rural, right? An hour from the closest airport, no local cabs or things to move people around, really rural. And it was an incredible eye-opening experience for us to see people from major cities. We had 29 states represented at the summit. So first summit, all people over the country coming together. We had the insanity of bus routes to get people from the airport down there. And then we took them on a 2-hour each way journey one of the days took them to Whitesburg and to Appleshop and getting to experience all that.
Yeah.
And the feedback we got was, you know, groundbreaking for us and really shifted our thinking because if you're a person in an urban area, it takes a lot to get you to somewhere rural. And so to have that experience, to spend 4 days in conversation with local people and experiencing and being on a bus for 4 hours just to go and visit somewhere that has a core, well-known arts connection in the country. And so we thought it was only going to be 1 year. It's like, great, where are we going next? And we quickly heard from folks, you need to go back to Berea because we want to send other people who want to be there.
Uh,
So we ended up deciding that our summit would be in the same location for 3 years in a row. So the first year really becomes that grounding, here we're here. The second year, we see the energy pick up from the local community as they want to see more happen and engage. And again, at the summit, you get to engage with a national audience. So having that chance to come together. And then if you went the first year, either you tell your fellow colleagues that you're going again and they're stuck because you went the first time and you want to keep going, or we've seen people rotate and say, okay, I went this year, now you get to go next year, and that kind of thing.
yeah.
And every year the summit's different, but yet you can go back home and have those, hey, did you go to that restaurant, did you look at this, did that artist there? So we did 17, 18, and 19 in Berea, and then we decided to go to Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So their tagline is a city of arts and innovation, but yet they're a city, but they're very much that rural feel of North Carolina in a lot of different ways.
Very close to
Um,
us here, actually. It's very close.
Lovely. And so 2020 we were going to be in Winston-Salem, and then we weren't. Then we were online. And so the 2021 we were going to be there, and then last minute we had to go online because I think that's when the Delta variant was really active. So finally this past year we were finally in Winston-Salem for our first year. So we were there in 22. We will be there again in 23 and again in 24. So we have 3 years of local connection. In that frame, the Tremaine Foundation also does additional grants in the community. So we fund different artist initiative or other programs. Right now, we're supporting the Winston-Salem Arts Council to have an intern, a paid intern, on board to help them navigate more artist support and things like that they're looking to do. So we're not the typical conference. We don't, everyone flies in, stays at the hotel, and then flies out, and that's all you hear of it. It's an engaged length of time.
Right.
And it also means that from the attendees, we limit it to 200 in person so that you have a chance to meet everyone over the course of the 4 or 5 days, but it's intimate enough that you really build a relationship with some of those other folks attending. And again, kind of unique from what conferences are out there. It is an attendance that is a complete mix of artists, arts administrators who are also artists,
Mm.
educators, and funders. So almost every year, someone walks up to me and says, "My worlds have just collided here. I went to college with that person. That person was my professor. I've done a grant with them. I'm currently in a group with that person, and I had no clue any of those people would be here." So from being a national base, it's really great to see those kind of connections and things happen. Um, it is kind of that kind of summit format that there is presenters, there is leaders, but it's designed to say that everyone who comes has knowledge to share. There is, we don't put the expert in front of the room. We put the person who could start the conversation at the front of the room. So a little bit different in that vein. And then the collective group that helps form this summit has been part of planning this since 2020 because that's when we were supposed to start in Winston-Salem. But it's been a core 15-person cohort that's followed this through. So it's been great to be able to hear them as they think through the evolution of the work and the deeper engagements and all of that. So it's not an every year, it's a different steering committee that's forming it. So I think that means a lot as well.
Yeah, that's
And those people are also funded to be part in those roles with honorariums. Um, but they've pushed us this year to say in 23, we have to consider everyone from all different levels. So there's a full UDL lens on this, universal design for learning.
mhm.
So short sessions, longer sessions, more meetups throughout, speed dating, things like that all through it. And then because the arts are the arts, there is now 9:30 PM sessions, so it's a 14-hour conference because the people who can make the 9:30 AM sessions are probably heading to bed after dinner, but the people who didn't get up until noon are,
Right.
really felt this past year like we had dinner and we just got going and now there's nothing more.
Yeah.
So we're also planning evening sessions. So we really do, when we look at it, say, who is this for? How do we best engage them? If people are going to take a week out of their life, spend the funds to be there, how do we engage them to the highest level, that they really feel connected, feel brought together of this network, and then gain knowledge, gain connections that they take back home with them that they continue.
That's great. With the 200 participants, how is that process if somebody wants to come? Is it first come, first serve? Is there an application process?
It is first come, first serve. We're hoping to launch the registrations in March. That will have a astronomically high registration fee of $150 for the whole week.
Right.
And so there is additional costs related to your travel and the hotel and things, but we've tried to minimize the barrier of registration. But that registration will go up to $200 come May. So if you want the lower rate, which is technically the 22 rate, we're keeping that in place for some of the early bird kind of registrations. But the framework we're also taking in this, which is what we started this past year, is it will be a hybrid summit. And it's one of the things that really makes me upset and annoyed with the universe, is that many arts organizations are going back to in-person only and aren't making things hybrid because it's the online experience that is the most inclusive, that removes all the barriers.
Sure.
And so we will have a full, the 200 is in person, but we can have hundreds more online, part of it. And then just about every session is recorded and available. So if you can't make it live, but you can do this, we'll make the recordings available to all those who register. And obviously, the online registration is a much lower cost than the in person because we're not giving you 5 meals. Um, but the online has been so important that we're watching so many groups walk away from and not realizing you open the door and now you've closed it again.
Yeah.
So we won't walk away from that.
Yeah. Well, I know that I'm gonna try to sign up and come. It's Winston Salem is just a hour and a half or so from here, and so it would be great. But I agree. We in some of the conversations I've been having, we've been having a lot of conversations of the virtual versus the in person, and when not to. But you're right. I mean, absolutely the ability to widen who can participate, how they can participate. I do imagine probably the in person is a much richer, fuller experience, but if you are in a small community out there and it's not quite possible for you to geographically or financially make swing it, this is a great way to educate yourself, get engaged, and grow.
Yeah. And
So
and I think, from an arts organization standpoint on that, is that we don't, even though we're arts, we don't have to do it to perfection. We don't necessarily need a professional videography team in there recording things to be there. This past year's summit, we did it with an owl, which is a unit that has the 360-degree camera on it and good speakers. And we had Zoom techs in the room that were able to kind of force the owl to look around the room if someone was asking a question. So it wasn't just all you can see is the speaker in the front of the room and it's a passive sit back and do. That Zoom tech was also watching all the chat. So if you were online and you chatted a question, it got asked out by the Zoom tech in the room, doing that support. So I think there's ways that everyone can think about it that isn't a huge cost barrier, but is, removing that barrier to those, and doesn't necessarily have you, rethink how do I run two things at the same time all the time.
yeah. Yeah, that's great. Well, as a final note, Heather, I really appreciate this. What advice, I was in the podcast with this, for artists and arts organizations and smaller communities. What advice might you give them as if they're facing struggles right now, they're trying to figure out how to make it go? What would be the most potent advice that you could give?
Yeah, so know that you're not alone. There's others also in that struggle, and certainly use from the Artist Thrive side the resources that are on there, the downloadable documents and everything that you can do to take on that, and jump on the Artist Thrive social media sites and post those questions, ask those out there in the community, and what we find the most, is everyone posts the question they think that no one else experiences, and they instantly find that cohort of folks that you might just be an online group of people that you can all complain together with, and that venting alone makes you feel more connected. But in that venting, in that networking, you suddenly start to find solutions and you find step forwards. We see a number of people within the Artist Thrive tools actually use them as lunch and learns to go through it together as a group and learn from each other. So no matter how rural you are, there are other people out there, maybe even in your own community, who can be assets to you, who can be mentees and mentors for the work that you do. And they don't even have to be in the arts. They just might have to be people who appreciate the arts and can look at things with a different perspective.
Yeah, that's great. That's fantastic. Well, Heather, thank you so much, and I really encourage everyone to check out Artist Thrive, as well as the summit and all the online tools that are available. They're really fantastic. And Heather, just a reminder, it's artistthrive.org, correct?
Yes, correct.
Wonderful. Take a visit, take a look, and Heather, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you for the work that you're doing in this sector. It's really important and really incredible.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Small Town Big Arts. Remember to rate and review us and share with your friends. To learn more, visit us at smalltownbigarts.com. Until next time, I'm your host, Jeffrey Kirschner.